During this time period, from 68 to 79, 90% of public services stopped.
Like, they didn't get mail for 10 years.
90%. Roads, mail, sanitation,
electricity,
food, electricity, all of that. 90%. Half the population was either murdered or fled.
Hey everybody, we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
And I'm Dr. Erin.
And you are exceptionally welcome to the final stop on the Colonizers World Tour 2021 edition, where we are talking about Equatorial Guinea.
Uh-huh.
Now, friends and neighbors, if you did not know that Equatorial Guinea was a country, you are absolved.
Join the club.
If you thought it was on the equator, you are absolved. If you didn't know that Spain had an African colony, we're here to teach you all. Also,
we bring you absolution.
Fun fact up front, one of their dictators at one point decided to murder people who were wearing glasses. So this is a place that's going to be a little bit of a conversation. Uh-huh. We want you to know that up front. The people of Equatorial Guinea have been through it, y'all.
They've been through the wars.
And they're still kind of in it, to be honest. Still kind of in it. So, I mean, Dr. Erin, what do you bring? What Jeopardy level of knowledge do you bring to Equatorial Guinea before we started Googling?
I wrongly assumed that it was on the equator. Because of its name, and that was it. I did know before we started Googling that it was in Africa, only because we covered French Guiana, and
we kept mixing them up.
So, but that's the only reason why I knew. But I wouldn't have been able to tell you where it was in Africa, except near the equator, but not on it, just in case you were curious. How about yourself?
I mean, I knew it was a country because it's in Yakko Warner's Countries of the World song.
Nice.
Which I at one point had memorized and could sing.
I don't know that I know that song.
United States, Mexico, Canada, Panama, Jamaica, Peru. I will send you. I will put the link in the show notes.
It's like 50 nifty United States.
Yes. Yeah.
Countries of the world. Yeah.
I'm an Animaniacs enthusiast.
I can still sing most of the 50 states.
Nice.
If I get going. But
yeah,
that's by the by.
That one's by Yakko Warner. Yakko Warner did the U.S. states and their capitals, which I might be able to do at some point too. I can also sing the entire genealogy of Jesus, thanks to Andrew Peterson, should anyone ever need me to do that. Guys, can you tell I didn't know anything about Equatorial Guinea? Let's go to the map. So as we mentioned, it is on the continent of Africa. It is adjacent to the equator, but no part of the equator actually goes through Equatorial Guinea, because why would it? It's in Central Africa between Cameroon and Gabon, which we will definitely cover at some point, because what I do know about Gabon is fascinating. Yeah. It is slightly smaller than Maryland, and it is just really insular in some ways, and it's got these regions that are widely separated. It's geographically difficult to manage, and its rulers have taken advantage of that, to be completely honest. There's under 1 million people that live there, 857,000. I didn't think we would find somewhere smaller than Northern Ireland, but we managed. We found Equatorial Guinea. It has 2 large cities, over 30,000 people. Bata on the mainland, and the capital, Malabo, is on the island of Bioko, which we will talk about. There's a new capital being built, and actually it's built now. And there's a lot of videos about it in the show notes. There's a lot of controversy around the building of that capital, building of the buildings, why it's moving, everything else. So, watch this space. At one point, I watched a video, they were talking about calling the capital Sipopo. And then another one where I see they're going to call it Ciudad de la Paz. I mean, it sounds like decision-making is not necessarily a priority. Spanish is the official language, and 68% of people would identify themselves as completely fluent in Spanish, and it being their primary language. But we've also got French as an official language, Portuguese as an official language, some tribal languages as official languages. It's all kind of a thing, which is kind of why, in a very, very real, honest way, I'm not super surprised that the movie we're covering tomorrow is actually entirely done in English. Because it really sounds like that would be the simplest answer, looking at this linguistic soup that is Equatorial Guinea. Ethnic and indigenous wise, this is one of the most concentrated tribes we've seen in a little while. 85% of folks claim the Fang tribe, the Fang people. Fang people are well-known artisans all over the continent of Africa, and there's some beautiful links to some beautiful showcases. Bizarrely, because of colonialism, the University of Iowa Museum has a great collection of Fang masks and carvings. Should anyone be near the University of Iowa Museum, you're probably nearer to it, and it's safer to go to than Equatorial Guinea these days. Hey-o. Sorry. The currency is the Central African franc. That's used by a couple other countries in Central Africa, which someday when we talk about the Congo, we'll talk about how that's really the best bet for them. And so that works. The system of government, it says it's a presidential republic with 8 provinces. Every article we read, every video we watched, everybody really leaned towards this being a series of dictatorships. And that elections and changeover of power and some other things we would expect to see in a presidential republic don't really occur in Equatorial Guinea. And we'll get into that. Dr. Aaron's going to tell you all about the guy who hated glasses in a little while, so don't worry. It is nominally, religion-wise, it's a Spanish colony, right? So like Roman Catholic Church, a go-go. Except Glasses Dude had a thing against the church, and I think honestly he read a little bit too much Marx, misinterpreted some things, and did what the USSR did and eliminated all religion overnight in 1978. So when he was overthrown, the church started coming back, and they talk about it in a couple different sources we've seen, that the mission societies and Catholic charities were a big part of getting the country kind of back on its feet after that very disastrous time of its history. And so now around 90% of the population once again would identify as Christian on some level, and most of them would identify as Catholic. What that kind of Catholicism looks like honestly feels like anybody's guess. I can only imagine the amount of relationship between formal Catholicism and local customs and faith systems, all the syncretism that we talk about sometimes in other places, especially in Catholic countries. Brazil is one where I believe there's a lot of syncretism happening. Yeah. Which again, syncretism is here's the established faith, here's how life works where we are, and syncretism is where they bleed together. So it's very common, happens everywhere. Everywhere. Even in religions that claim it doesn't. It does. Humans are humans, y'all. So those are the basic demographics. I will tell you that there's a lot of countries that we've covered that have broken me. This one went beyond in some way. Like, I skipped directly past grief into incandescent anger for the people of Equatorial Guinea, and I haven't left there.
No.
I am disgusted and furious at the situation that these people are forced to live under. There's no way most have the resources to leave the country, and it does not sound like anybody is offering them asylum on any level, even though we really should be on some, to be completely honest, economic asylum, if nothing else. This is not an easy sit. We're going to be sarcastic a little bit, as we already have been, because that's how we process incandescent anger.
It's a coping mechanism.
But you've heard us like nearly weep over Mozambique and Angola and some Papua New Guinea and some other countries. This one we're sitting on anger, so just know that going. And now let me pass it over to my partner in fury, Dr. Erin. Talk to us about the economy.
I'd be delighted to partner in fury. So the economy in Equatorial Guinea is really interesting. Similarly to Angola, very unstable, recently prosperous, but still not equitable, ironically, in Equatorial Guinea. They found gas, but here for the jokes. They found oil in the 1990s, around 1995, 96, and that drove economic growth quite high until the 2008 global recession. Pre-independence Equatorial Guinea had counted a lot on agricultural production, namely cocoa and coffee, for hard currency. But they really started to neglect the rural economy. Part of it is because of where they're positioned in the Gulf of Guinea. Part of it is because the capital is on Bioko, which is a large island off the coast. And so the actual part of mainland Equatorial Guinea is a lot of times ignored. It's a really interesting place. Subsistence farming is still the dominant form of livelihood for a lot of people, and in a country that doesn't really focus on agriculture, that can tell you a lot about how those folks are doing. 44% of the population is below the poverty line, even though it has per capita one of the highest GDPs, I think the highest GDP in Africa, which tells you a lot of that there's a lot of money there, but only a few people have their hands on it, which is part of the anger that we have. Only part. In terms of demographics, the median age is only 20, so it's a very young country. Life expectancy is not great. 66 years of age, that's pretty low, even for Central Africa. It is one of the smallest and least populated countries on continental Africa, and is the only independent African country where Spanish is an official language. And I'll get to colonization in a minute. Basically, the Spanish were very Portuguese about it and said, this is a strategic place. I did not write this sentence. This is from our friends, I believe, at Human Rights Watch. Despite a boom in oil production in the 1990s, authoritarianism, corruption, and resource management have concentrated the benefits among a small elite.
Tale as old as time.
Yes. Yeah. This is not great for the young population in Equatorial Guinea. Job creation in non-oil sectors is very limited. Young people don't have skills to enter the labor market. Children often enter school late, have poor attendance, and leave early. So it's... And
none of this covers HIV/AIDS or COVID or Ebola. If it got there, I cannot remember in this moment, but it was very active in that part of the continent. So it doesn't even touch that
part of it. Yeah. So the economy, like the post-independence economy, and politics has dictated a lot of demographic issues and then human rights issues as well. From our friends at Human Rights, who like to tell the world how it is, corruption, poverty, and repression continue to plague Equatorial Guinea under President Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mazongo. I'm terrible at pronouncing names. Who has been in power since 1979. More on that in a mo. tiny group of elite people live lavishly off of the vast oil revenues, which is just super.
And like
super
when
great.
we say lavishly, we mean like Kardashian level.
Wait till I tell you about the vice president, y'all.
Guys, this dude's son. This dude's son.
He's a lot. There's where corruption follows, there's mismanagement of public funds, serious abuses, allegations of serious abuses, including torture, detention, unfair trials. His eldest son, Obiang's eldest son, and possible successor, Theodorin, who was convicted in France on embezzlement and money laundering charges in two
Not
separate
that long
cases.
ago.
Not that long ago, 2018. In two separate cases, the United States and Switzerland agreed to settle with Theodorin, resulting in a confiscation of assets that would be used ostensibly to benefit Equatorial Guinea's people. You can take a guess on how well that's going. For the ladies in Equatorial Guinea, they have historical commonalities with other parts of Central Africa, but because of the unique experience of Equatorial Guinean women during the slave trade and Spanish colonialism, their patriarchy is specific. Women don't have a lot of political power because they don't have a lot of economic power, which is the truth for women around the world. They only represent about 45% of the total labor force. They have less access to education and lower school attendance. They have pretty high rates of gender-based violence. 63% of women in 2011 reported experiencing some form of violence. Rape is illegal, but the law does not address spousal rape, which we know is a huge problem in developing parts all around the world. Similar to the patriarchy, everywhere, the police and judicial system are more likely to treat domestic violence as a private matter to be resolved in the home, which is, again, why we get these instances of gender-based violence and the high instances of them, because the perceptions of them are so gendered. Sexual orientation is another weird gray area. Again, on our map of like laws of protection, it's not protected, it's not criminalized. They appear to be relatively progressive compared to other African nations on paper, but as we often say in these, the difference between paper and practice can be broad. Homosexual activity is legal for both males and females. You can change your gender. In Equatorial Guinea, you do not have to have surgery in order to do that legally. So that's on the upscale. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Same-sex marriage is not recognized. Not good.
Great.
Not great. Same-sex adoption is only legal for single humans. Not great. Homosexual people.
That logic has always failed me.
I don't like
that particular logic is always tough for me to square.
I know. That one, I just, like, only one person isn't corrupting, two people is. I don't understand.
Yeah, I can't really get there.
Either gay people can raise kids or they can't. Like, I don't understand what one or two has to do with it. Homosexual people are allowed to openly serve in the military and donate blood. So, again, like, slightly more progressive. But the IELGA reports that there's a lot of evidence of state intimidation of gender and sexually diverse folks. So, as we always say, what's on paper and what happens on the ground, two different things. There's some super scary draft legislation that I learned about in my research before the government that it could include a ban on gay pride events and a provision requiring the government to establish a social reintegration policy for queer folks who voluntarily abandon their homosexuality.
Well, I would love to introduce them to all of the research from Exodus International. We've tried this already, and it didn't work.
Yeah, so it's not conversion therapy, but it's some kind of reward for I don't
even understand.
I don't even know. It's a little alarming, to say the least, that it's being drafted. We don't like it. The other thing we don't like is colonization, which is why we're here. That wasn't a good transition. I'm not as good as my esteemed transition queen colleague, Dr. Kristen. But let's talk about colonization anyway. This area of the world was first colonized by the Portuguese explorer Poe, who was trying to get to India, hence why we have Portuguese colonies in Africa, because the Portuguese were like maritime explorers international and just kept landing in Africa and being like, not India, crap. They first established settlements there around 1500, but eventually, a couple hundred years later, the Portuguese strike a deal with Spain in 1778 and say, you can have Bioko, which is the big island. They didn't really want to invest in developing the mainland across from Bioko. So the Spanish leased Bioko to the UK from 1827 to 1843. It's a strange part of the world, folks. The Spanish took back control in 1844, but they didn't really start with like the heavy-duty colonization until we start to get the arrival of Catholic missionaries in the 1870s. So again, the Catholicism of it all really was when they started trying to make it a Spanish colony, full stop. They still left the mainland really on its own until 1900, and the Treaty of Paris gave them the continental enclave of Rio Muni, which is what the land is called that is now the mainland part of Equatorial Guinea. It was much smaller parcel of land than they thought they deserved. Would have loved to have been in the room for that conversation. But the Spanish settlers began to plant themselves in the area. But they didn't have a lot of labor. Always a problem. Especially after the slave trade was abolished. So they eventually, by the early 1920s, we get to the unification of Bioko and Rio Muni as Spanish Guinea. Not French Guyana. Don't get confused. Spanish Guinea. The economy was based, as we said, on cocoa and coffee plantations and logging. The workforce was mostly immigrant contract labor from neighboring places, Liberia, Nigeria, and Cameroon. They had a law, which is really interesting, that considered all Equatorial Guinean people to be minors regardless of age, which is something I don't think we've encountered yet in our Colonizers World Tour.
No, I mean, that takes, like, paternalistic to a new level.
Yeah. So, like, regardless of anything, you're a minor. Fascinating.
Cool.
Colonizer. Okay, colonizer.
Yep.
To quote Princess Sherry. There was another category of humans called the emancipated, which set up this weird kind of de facto apartheid between white and black populations.
Of course it did.
Yep. One thing we haven't quite covered yet in our Spanish colonies, because the Spanish Civil War didn't directly affect the other ones we covered as much. The Spanish Civil War had a huge impact on Equatorial Guinea, which is really interesting. Franco sent forces but had some resistance. He eventually gained control. But the takeover of Franconian ideas in Spain had a real influence on what would later happen in Equatorial Guinea. After the Second World War, we have this huge wave of decolonization of Africa, which we have already talked about in bits and pieces. So post-war Equatorial Guinea had 3 phases. From 1945 to 1959, its status was changed from colonial to provincial, so it was made a province of Spain. Kind of similar to French Guiana, really, which is still like a department of France.
Yeah.
From 1960 to 68, Madrid tried to partially decolonize, but they still wanted to keep it in the Spanish system. Didn't go well. And then from 1968 onward, it became an independent republic. So independence was declared on the 12th of October, 1968, country thus becoming the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. And the man aforementioned who hates glasses, Francisco Marcias Nguma, became the first president, and he was just certifiable.
Yeah, and we don't use that lightly. Like, he reminds us of Nero.
Yeah, we're not joking. He had clear psychological issues.
Yeah, and that came out as megalomaniacal dictatorship.
that manifested in very, very violent and oppressive ways.
Very.
There's no two ways to say that.
No.
It
For
was
about
a
10 years.
horrifying totalitarian regime.
Yeah.
He outlawed opposition political parties in 1970. In 1972, he declared himself president for life. He made really strange declarations about who he was and gave himself all these kinds of titles. Yeah. He banned religion in 1974, as Dr. Kristen mentioned, and killed lots of religious folks before and after that. During this time period, from 68 to 79, 90% of public services stopped.
Like, they didn't get mail for 10 years.
90%. Roads, mail, sanitation,
electricity,
all of that. 90%. Half the population was either murdered or fled. Like, so it was everyone, and it. If you're wondering where this guy came from and what he has to do with colonization, great question. For Macias, everyone opposed to him was suspected of being an agent of Spanish imperialism. That was his particular brand of crazy, and I mean crazy in the literal psychological sense. He framed everything in, oh, you're an agent of Spanish imperialism. You're trying to take back the country. And so that's why he banned religion, because Catholicism was from the Spanish, and like that's how he framed and justified everything. So then we get the introduction of the current president, Teodoro Obiang, who deposed his uncle in August of 1979.
Oh, that's right.
In a very bloody coup.
2 presidents, same family.
Same family. They've only had 2 presidents since 1968.
It's not great. It's not great.
Dictator number 1, dictator number 2. There was a short civil war until Macias was captured. He was executed publicly, and Teodoro succeeded him as and this was a descriptor from one of the places I was researching, less bloody but still totalitarian president.
Yeah, like somebody said, like, hey, life is not great right now, but there's not this like outright revolution movement. And I wondered why until I started researching Macias, and now I'm like, they're still tired.
Still... Macias was so traumatic.
Like, I can't fathom 10 years.
I didn't even include this in my description, but he literally ordered the execution of people who wore glasses.
Like, literally. And then one Christmas, he ordered the army to dress up as Santa Claus, every single one of them, and murder his political opponents in the public square as a Christmas gift to Ghanaians.
Yeah.
Guys. He wasn't okay.
He wasn't well.
And it does explain a little bit of why I can see Teodoro, the current dude, getting a little bit of a pass, because he saved him from that dude.
Yeah. The enemy of my enemy. Mm-hmm. You know? So Obiang has been, as we said, president since 1979. His son is his vice president. So all in the family, a little too literally there. They discovered oil in 1995, and since then it's been even worse. Government mismanagement, corruption, and political suppression. Not as bad as Santa Christmas Day massacres. So again, all in comparison. As of 2016, Teodoro is the second longest serving dictator in Africa, but it's problematic because a lot of people, as Dr. Kristen said, don't consider him a dictator. He, met with the Obamas in the White House and has been legitimized on a global scale in a way that a lot of dictators aren't.
He's like in the Idi Amin strain of dictatorship.
Yeah, and because he's not as violent as Amin was or Macias.
And he's selling oil, and we don't piss off people that sell oil, just really honestly. So it's...
No, and I mean, like, that's the whole reason why I think, not the whole reason, but that's a huge motivating factor, is because of the strategic position of Bioko in the Gulf of Guinea and the oil deposits.
Yeah, which run out in another 15 years, supposedly. So that'll be really interesting.
to see what happens. In the 1982 Constitution, it gave him extensive powers, which he has used to his benefit. He shows little tolerance for oppositions. Elections are a sham. And the oil boom has been used to enrich himself, his family, and his supporters. And thus, where we find ourselves now, the COVID of it all predictably has gone real bad for Equatorial Guinea, which we're now starting to see some protests and some pushback from the people, because that is the proverbial straw in terms of, I think that as long as they were safe and healthy, they were willing to let some of his more dictatorial tendencies go. On a large
scale anyway. Like, we're sure. I mean, and it's hard for even in Spanish language stuff, it was really hard to find, stuff from Equatorial Guinea. So it's entirely possible that there's this massive burgeoning independence movement, and if there is, we'd love to know, but we couldn't find any information about it publicly. And getting covered by Al Jazeera and some of the other is now a lot more around how the money to get the Moderna vaccine in particular is being used or not used. So that is making international headlines. Additionally, the International Monetary Fund just gave them a grant to make sure everybody in Equatorial Guinea could get vaccinated. It'll be interesting to see how tightly the IMF traces that grant and if it goes to where it's supposed to go.
Yeah, and I think, like, that's such an important thing. Like, obviously, this is, the information we have is based on what we could find. And I was surprised, given how interesting its history is, how little a lot of the resources we normally rely on talked about Equatorial Guinea.
It like, a little, upsetting. Upsetting.
Because a lot of the places we go to, we find what we can and we rely on formal structured content and news services as well as informal. But I have a whole list of places I start with, and The Guardian, PBS NewsHour, NPR, Al Jazeera English, Wall Street Journal, very little coverage.
Very little.
So if you know more and you have information, we found a 55-minute documentary from the U.S. Embassy that is pure propaganda. So,
still really helpful to understand.
Helpful historical context.
But it's the embassy.
Yeah, until it gets to the Obiang presidency, and then it's sunshine and roses. So if you've got resources, that would be cool. You could help us out. But it's just a fascinating, tiny little piece of land. Dr. Kristen, what is your Jeopardy fact for the last Jeopardy fact for this tour on our Colonizers World Tour? What struck you about Equatorial Guinea?
I mean, I think for a Jeopardy, it will be a Jeopardy question as to like that the equator doesn't actually run through it, but I think that will show up. But the dressing people as Santa, that's going to be something that sticks with me for a long ass time.
We've encountered some really violent histories on this tour. And some places have truly shocked us with the level of violence. Japan and the rape of Nanking.
Yeah, that one's still mind-boggling.
The number of coups in Fiji. Lots of places around the world. Lots of horrible treatment of humans. I've never heard of anyone forcing their soldiers to dress as Santa and massacre political opponents.
Yeah, it really does take the cake for me. It's like that's just what that's going to be my truly depressing dinner party fact for a really long time.
For a really long time. I know. You and I, 10 years from now, are going to look at each other and just be like, Santa.
Santa. Yeah, we've got a couple phrases like that. Dalky is one of them. We just look at each other every once in a while.
Like one-word phrases where we just go, Santa.
Yeah. Santa.
My fact is similarly dark, but also slightly amusing. in a way that we have to be able to laugh at this stuff so we don't cry. The United States used the money returned from assets. We seized a bunch of assets of Vice President Teodorin, U.S. assets, including a California beach house that looks very nice.
Yeah, it does.
To pay for 1.2 million Moderna vaccines. So this is the level of corruption we're dealing with. He has flashy cars and houses all over the world, and they were gained illegally, and when they were seized, that's how they were supposed to pay for the Moderna vaccines. That hasn't even yet happened, and as Dr. Kristen said, the IMF had to step in on this as well. But Human Rights Watch had a quote that said that the sale of a beach house can fund a countrywide vaccine drive highlights both the costs of corruption and the power of international investigations to repair some harm. This is a positive spin by Human Rights Watch. We haven't seen the repair of harm yet, but the costs of corruption. The sale of a beach house can fund an entire country's vaccine drive.
Just as a aside, if we took the amount of money that the United States spends on golf every year, we could actually provide health care for every person on the planet.
Golf for, like, officials?
Like every the country club fees, the amount that money that we the amount of money that we spend on golf.
Got it.
Can give worldwide healthcare to all 7 billion people.
Okay.
While we're talking about economic disparity.
Disparities.
Just in case anyone got on their high horse that Equatorial Guinea is the worst place.
Very often we learn, although in this case, we have yet to learn how the United States has made Equatorial Guinea worse, except
that's true.
Arguably the involvement in oil.
Yeah, and that's probably I don't know how much we can be to blame for him.
Right.
But I don't, when I looked on Amazon, there's a bunch of really scholarly works around Equatorial Guinea. And so I put a couple on hold at the library. We'll see if we can find answers in there. But, I think the sale of a beach house, it was in Calabasas too. It wasn't schlubby. And he hadn't been there in 5 years or something nuts like that. He just bought it.
Yeah.
So there's lots of videos about that family in the document below. Please have fun. Have fun getting to know this delightful family and their legacy to the people of Equatorial Guinea.
And lest you think tomorrow or the next videos going to continue to explore this family, oh no. Please join us for our discussion of the piece of art from Equatorial Guinea we found where the road runs out that has absolutely nothing to do with any of the stuff we just mentioned.
Not a single thing except that it is also set in Equatorial Guinea.
So we hope you've learned a lot about Equatorial Guinea. We've done some myth busting, not on the equator, and another harrowing tale of colonization and its lasting impacts around the world. If you don't join us for Where the Road Runs Out, we hope you join us next March. We're taking a pause in the Colonizers World Tour. Our other series on YouTube will be ongoing as we love to talk to each other and to you. But we're going to take a research break and come back fresh in March of 2022. I almost said 2021, but no, it's the next year. If you have information about Equatorial Guinea or any of the other places we've covered, or you'd like to talk to us about it, please reach out. We love to have conversations about all this stuff and have other people to rage at around the world. Do all the YouTube-y things, like and subscribe and share, click the bell, tell your friends. We are incredibly proud to be a little bit boastful of this series and what we've learned from it and the discussions it's fostered, even just between the two of us. So if you like it and you think others would benefit, please give it a share, and we'll see you when we see you.
Take care, everyone.